Hello. I'd like to call the Newbury Planning Board meeting of this date, January 16, 2019, to order. We have a couple of things on the agenda this evening. My name is Rachel McManus, and to my left is Larry Murphy and
Kristen Gross.
Pete Pecos?
Martha Taylor and George Morris.
And George Morris is participating by phone remotely this evening
For his request.
per his request.
Due to illness.
So, do we have any, we do have a continued hearing that we will open at the appropriate time. Do we have anything prior to that we want to, any housekeeping we want to do in the interim?
We could do some liaison reports if you want.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's get those going.
Okay. I can do the report from the Board of Selectmen's meeting. Help if I could find the agenda for the meeting. But a couple of things of interest to the board. One, and I don't know if you're all aware, but there's been an ongoing issue with Bob Lobster and alcohol license, and that was granted. One of the issues there was a contention that that it was an expansion of use. Sam determined that it was not, and also that there might be some issue with sort of continuous use, and that all seems to be in order, so the license was granted. Neil Duffy from Green Communities did give his presentation to the Board of Selectmen, and they voted to at least look into the program. So I had a meeting with Neil Duffy, and actually Sam joined us yesterday, and Joe Cosgrove, to talk about the first steps and what might need to be done. I think one of the biggest concerns on the part of the Board of Selectmen was the stretch code, and concern about the impact that might have on businesses and residences and contractors. And that's not a concern of Sam's at all. It's so close to the base code now that it's not much of a lift. And stretch code is actually a general bylaw, so it's fortunately not something that we have to do as a zoning amendment, which is helpful.
That's a good thing.
Right, but we do need to look at zoning for research and development for alternative energy facilities. We might just need to tweak our language a little bit, but Neil seems to think that we're pretty well set with that. So I need to touch base with Tracy to see, what the next steps would be. Probably one would be to have another meeting with the selectmen, to have Sam talk about the stretch code and his support, maybe have a forum with local builders.
Yeah. Did Mr. Duffy offer some sort of a, checkbox, step-by-step of what the process?
He sent me a matrix,
Yeah.
so I think that will be our guideline for doing that.
That'd be good.
And the other thing that was discussed, Marshall Jesperson's request to dismantle and rebuild the barn came before them, and they did approve that.
Okay.
So I think Sam will move forward with issuing a building permit. The Historical Commission, I guess, Chair did have a conversation with him about some conditions that they wanted to have placed on the permit, so I'm not sure where that's all ending up, but,
Right.
but he did get permission to go forward with that.
Well, that's good.
So those were the highlights. Lots of business license renewals.
Right. Right. Do you have any?
Conservation Committee?
Yes, me. That would be more.
Okay.
Actually, there was a very short meeting. Most of the items on the agenda were continued. There was one item for emergency generator with accompanying propane tanks that was approved for Mrs. Macheros. And there was an emergency certificate that was approved for, as I understand it, it was work that pretty much was already completed for Mass DOT out on Route 1 by the traffic circle. I think it was in the area of the circle finishing property. So since it was already basically accomplished, the Concom one, and issued the certificate. So, and that was pretty much it. It was a very slow meeting for Concom. So, we're almost there.
Let's see, ZBA, they're meeting on the 31st, so I don't think there's anything
Yeah, so
on
there
that.
probably isn't.
All right, and NPPC, Pete and I are both going to the commissioners' meeting tomorrow night.
Yes, tomorrow
So
night.
you will get to meet everybody, they're looking forward to meeting you.
Good.
I think one of the main agenda items is actually they're gonna be rolling out the regional housing plan. As I believe that all the communities now have approved the plan, I don't know that they've all been approved by DHCD, but it's pretty much done.
I kind of went boom, 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 boom after a while.
Yeah, no, it moved forward pretty quickly, and thanks, Karen and Mike and Angie did a great job. Sad piece of news is Angie's actually leaving NPPC. Yesterday was her last day, which I didn't know, so.
Do you know what she's doing?
I don't know what she's doing, I do know that they're looking for somebody to fill the community and economic development planner position. So, and then they have a couple of special meetings afterwards. I don't know how long it's gonna be, but they do feed us.
All right.
So we get pizza.
So that's a good thing.
So we'll report back on that next time. Let's see, town planners report, I could do that if you want.
Yeah,
A couple
go for
minutes.
it.
Let's see, I had a meeting yesterday with Jordy Vining, the senior project manager for Newburyport, regarding an extension of the rail trail, the Clipper City Rail Trail from the Parker Street entrance
Yeah.
down to connect, basically to complete the loop. So it's not a big length in Newbury, but what they're looking to do is to actually put in an 8-foot wide walkway to match the width of the trail from the Parker Street end down to the municipal boundary, and then the guy who's doing that Heinz Way development is going to be taking it from his development to the municipal boundary. But there are other segments that still need to be dealt with. Going across State Street, it'll cut through in front of the old Parker Street in front of the courthouse,
Mhm.
and then across Route 1 and back to the beginning, basically. So we're gonna try to get him on the agenda for the selectmen, just to talk about that. And we already have a memorandum of agreement for the part that went from Newburyport municipal boundary to Parker Street. See what comes of that.
So Newburyport's responsible for the crossing?
They basically would be responsible for all of it. You know, cost-wise and engineering, it's basically permission to do the work on our right-of-way. So what they're looking to do, the cemetery fence is actually within our right-of-way, and so they'd have to move that back and put it between the phone poles and the cemetery fence. And Jordy thinks there's enough room. Need to determine if there's any wetlands impact there. Doesn't look like it. But that's it.
Well, that would be
That
nice.
development's kind of wet though, isn't it?
I'm sure there is
Yeah.
probably back there, but I don't think right along the cemetery edge there is. But there are wetlands across the street, so it might, part of it's already in the buffer zone. It might be more in the buffer zone because of the wetlands that are on the south side of Parker. So it'll definitely be coming before the Concom when it gets to that point.
Right.
Timeframe unknown. Oh, sure.
Oh, that would be nice. Keep that trail going. I think we're there. I think we can now continue the meeting for the open space residential development at 170 Orchard Street with Mr. Lester. We understand that your engineer was unable to make it tonight.
Yes.
And so we decided to carry on, and that Mr. Lester could just provide for the folks who have come here for this
Right.
particular hearing, if you could just kind of give us a summary of
Where we've
where
been.
you're at.
Yep. I don't have anything new to present tonight, but other than the fact that since our last formal meeting, we did have a site visit. our responses to, so your peer review was completed. We responded to that peer review last week. There have been a set of comments on our response back already from your peer review consultant, and we are working on those as we speak. I apologize for Mr. Mello not being able to be here tonight. I got word middle of the day and kind of drove up to drop a check for the peer review off and talk to Martha about that. And as you pointed out, we decided to present tonight, or at least show up tonight to see if there are any questions that we can be working on between now and whenever we're next able to stand in front of you from anything that came out of either the sidewalk or the peer review. I can bring those questions back and we can begin to work on them. So we've got the peer review consultant for the town has been incredibly expeditious in getting us comments. We've been not quite as expeditious, but we have returned the comments.
Yeah, it's a return.
And we're now in the process of returning them again, the comments on the comments, if you will.
Right.
So I'm happy if there are any questions or items you want us to be working on between now and the next meeting. We're equally happy to just come to the next meeting, and I apologize for folks who might have come out tonight expecting to hear our engineering presentation. But I think it might actually work out well because we'll have all the comments back and forth the next time we see you. So that's where we are.
So does anyone from the board want to comment or have any questions?
Well, a couple of issues that struck me in a month. I mean, these are engineering issues.
Sure, I understand.
On the spot. One of the questions that Mr. Sawicki raised in his initial response had to do with what sort of construction was going on there, whether it be slab foundation or full
Right.
foundation. And I don't think we really got an answer to that. And I guess my concern would be if you're going to put in a full foundation dwellings, you're going to have to raise the grade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other thing I would find it very helpful if you commented on next time is Mr. Sawicki's January 6th letter regarding the yield plan. He seems to question whether or not the yield plan actually gives us sufficient information to make a
I think we are working on that. Yeah. I appreciate the comment.
I think the biggest question was the yield.
Yeah.
Well, we do have concerns about the yield plan. Do you have any other comments?
I don't think at this point, I mean, we raised some issues earlier about the fact that the land's in chapter 61A.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are also a number of waivers being requested, so considering the determination on waivers as public benefit, maybe some summary of, you know, how you see those waivers fitting into the project. And then certainly, you know, sort of the environmental analysis, which is tied up with the yield plan, but looking at water quality, erosion, stormwater impacts. Those are some of the areas I look forward to hearing more about.
Okay.
And I think generally we had a couple of questions just regarding the yield plan. For one thing, the wetlands, which your engineer, you know, stated crossed the entire parcel, whether that in fact would make the back portion, quote, non-contiguous in terms of open space.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we have questions about open space calculations and also, again, the soil. It just seems that we may have a question as to your 15 lot count because of soil. You know, by your own information, as you know, what is proposed, we can see, you know, 1 to 8 maybe you're there, and you seem to have, you know, it needs to be confirmed, but, and it would, but beyond that, we're having a little bit of trouble.
Okay.
So, you know, in terms of soils and wetlands and how you calculate, also retention ponds and retention areas are not supposed to count as open space, and so again, going back to the calculations as to,
Yep.
you know, what that is. So those are my concerns.
It splits out as about 3-to-1 open person, not open, but unused, I'll call it. Because you might
Unused,
not,
yeah,
accept it
right.
as open space.
Right, right.
But unused,
Right.
Or lot/road, so.
Right.
we
No,
do-
I agree with you there, but in terms of open space under the definition,
I understand,
you
yeah.
know, it's not the
Oh.
same thing. Right, I agree. So, those are my concerns. Martha, do you have any further concerns?
No, I think those pretty much hit it. One question I had, which I hadn't picked up on when we first looked at it, there is that barn foundation there.
Mhm.
Apparently it was a historic structure.
Yep,
What are your thoughts actually on?
we're kind of kicking that around now because we'd like to somehow memorialize that, though we don't want to have an open hole at the project, so we're kind of kicking that around now as to how we might do that in a way that tells the story of the forge.
Safely.
Yeah, safely and without liability, so we do
Right.
understand it's there and think it's an amenity that we might want to play up a little bit and connect to open space so that folks can at least understand what happened at the site, and what used to happen at the site.
George, does he have any?
George, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yep.
we can hear you.
Okay, I'd like to find out if you have a fully and in effect purchase and sale agreement for the action to be added to the application. I don't know, Martha, have you received anything like that yet?
No, I haven't. The only thing we received with the application was a letter of authorization from the administrator of the estate, or the executor of the estate.
Well, the letter of authorization was another issue where it was signed by one co-executor, and I can make a trip to Salem to find out who's doing what to whom, but I think it should be signed by two co-executors if there are two.
Mm-hmm.
We need a determination on that, please.
Okay.
And that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you good? All right. Well, if you're good.
Yes.
Well,
Anything from the public?
that's what I'm gonna do.
Sorry, jumping the gun here.
Yeah, so we'll open it up to the public now. I think as you know, the chair will recognize you. We request that you come up to the front of the room, state your name and your address, and go at it.
And my name is Greg Wolby, with at 144 Orchard Street. I went by the property today. There's two stakes, one by Bulgaris Farmhouse and the other by the White House. Is that the access to this property?
Mr. Lester, you wanna?
I don't know the stake you're talking about, but the access is between the farmhouse of Mr. Max and the White House, yeah.
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 That seems to be a very narrow right-of-way for going into a subdivision. I'm no longer with the Byfield Fire Department. I've been on that for 40-some odd years, but when I saw the two stakes, it'd be difficult getting a fire truck into that
We
property.
have 50 feet. So the stakes might not represent the 50 feet, we have 50 feet,
Okay, well,
yeah.
there's no 50
Well,
feet between those two stakes.
No, one of the stakes was put there by the gentleman who owns the White House. And it's not anything we did. But our right of way is 50 feet.
Does 50 feet, is that within the parameters of design from the town?
50 feet, shall I
Go
answer
ahead.
that?
Pretty narrow, isn't it?
50 feet has typically been the required width of the right-of-way. We did change our subdivision rules and regs a few years ago to really to favor country drainage and swales on both sides. So the requirement now is up to 53 feet, but 50 feet is very typical. There are a lot of lots in town that have a 50-foot frontage with the assumption that they would be subdivisions at some point.
But don't you have to have, where it enters Orchard Street, doesn't it have to curve out so you can get fire trucks in there?
That's one of the waivers that they're requesting. So that's something that needs to be looked at. But
Well, I guess I would question that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, please.
Channing Howard, 61 Central Street. Can we go through a short list of what waivers they're asking for? We have the 30-degree bevel on the road, and then the width of the paved entranceway is less than normal, is that correct?
It's not the pavement, it's actually the width of the right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 3 feet less than what our subdivision rules and regs require now, but this lot was created well before that.
Okay, okay. And the length of the road was also a waiver?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
It exceeds the length?
yeah, I don't actually have that right in front of me.
I think what the regs call for 500 feet, Mark.
Regs call for
Yeah,
500
and
feet.
theirs, plans are, I think it's like 950 or something like that. Mike, correct? Oh, that's the yield plan.
No, that's
Yeah, the yield plan's actually through. Bear with me a second, I've got
I
that.
thought it was close.
Yeah. So the waivers that are requested, there are 3 that have been requested. One was the 0 property line radius instead of the required 30 feet radius
At the entranceway?
at the entranceway.
Yeah.
Allow a right-of-way width of 50 feet instead of 53 feet. And then the third is to allow a cul-de-sac length of 920, exceeding a 500-foot maximum. There are some others that we haven't discussed, but for example, they're not showing sidewalks. So if there are going to be no sidewalks, that would be a waiver. They did request a waiver on a list of documents, such as a conservation
Legal
restriction, legal
documents.
documents. And we haven't really discussed that yet. And there were a few others that, yeah, it's very much still a work in progress.
You know, but this is a 2-step process. This is the special permit for the concept. And then, you know, secondly, if they get that, then they'll have to submit a definitive subdivision plans with a lot more detail in
Okay.
engineering.
And you also, last meeting, you asked about the alternative entrance off of Pearson Drive. Have they provided the house and the availability for that?
Well, they provided a,
Right.
An option agreement.
an option
agreement.
agreement. Yeah.
Option agreement, is that on file? Can we see that?
It's part of the application package, actually, yeah, so sure.
Okay, okay, all right, thank you.
Peter Mack, I live on the corner of this proposed road. A couple questions. Alluding back to the new stakes, there are Mr. Struzula on the right side. His property was surveyed last year. His corner is pinned. There are 2 new stakes there now. One appears to be on the corner of my lot. It's approximately 28 feet wide. Is that where the intended roadbed is to go, or is that something that's?
I don't know the stakes you're referring to, so I
Okay.
can't say.
Yeah, there's a couple new ones there. I just
Yeah.
wasn't sure if you've been out to the site since then.
No, I haven't been up to the site since then. So
Another question that I have, again,
I don't think we've done any stakes out there, so I don't know what those would be.
yeah, there's definitely a couple of new ones out
I'm
there.
not sure that we did them.
I don't know if it's you
Well-
or someone else, but it definitely is, shows that.
Yep.
So maybe when you're in the area, take a look. The second thing that I have a question on is the proposed septic system. I know, I guess the allowed area is 10 foot off the property line, and that's fine. It shows on your plan that it's a 5 foot off grade raised setup with a 4 foot fence on top. So it'll be a total of 9 foot tall. That's that's one thing, is that how that's supposed to be? The second thing is, my reserve area for my particular system is 10 foot off the backside of my line. Will there be an effect on my reserve system as a result of your system being so close to my lot? I'm not a septic system engineer guy, but it just seems that it might get saturated, but I don't know. Cool.
Thank
That's
you.
what I got.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or care to comment?
Ann Quill for Great Meadow Road. I was just wondering if the planning board did the site visit that you said and what you found?
A lot of mud
And golf
and
balls.
golf balls. Well, we found, I guess what you probably know is there, which was a very muddy site. It had been, the corn stalks had been cut, and we were just trying to get around the site without falling into everything. But what we found is that, we're surrounded really by other residential properties, and they were quite visible from, walking around the perimeters that we did. There were significant wetlands also. That was kind of my take. Does anybody else have a take that they would like to share?
I think it was just to get a feel for the size of the area, and then to try to identify where boundaries would be for wetlands, and to appreciate if a road were to go in, to be a connecting road, where that would be. So it was a very introductory experience to the project.
I know that everybody's property's been really saturated with all the rain we've had, and I just wondered if I guess it's way too early to know if it would be too wet for that lot they were talking about.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
Brian Mills, 35 Pearson Drive. And looking at this, that street was probably be right next to my house on Pearson Drive, so how much are we gonna be looking at putting that road in? Is it an option, or is it gonna happen?
It's a proposal, it's an alternative. It's either this or the OSRD development, which, do you have that on another plan up there?
Right on the back of that plan.
So let's turn that over so we can see the other plan.
And what would be the rules and regulations of the town for putting a road in of the offset to the property lines? And will there be a traffic impact study done on this?
If that's the way it goes, I would suspect, yes, one would be requested.
Okay.
It's not clear right now that that is in fact going to happen, or if that's going to be the chosen alternative.
Well, I mean,
You know.
if you look at that type of plan, if you're gonna develop this, is this gonna be all open space, or is this gonna be down to here? Is this the extent of the project here? Or is it gonna be coming back down here too?
Don't you want to flip
For more
that over
houses.
to the other side to answer the question?
So the Baker residence is,
Right next to my house, I know.
right, but on the plan though, here, and as you know, the yield plan comes out and exits to the Baker property. So the yield plan comes to here, and the OSRD plan, our preferred alternative comes right to here, with all this is open space.
So this would be all open space, so what you would...
And there's a match line here which goes about to here.
So basically what you're saying is up to, just by the lad's house,
Yep,
that would end that property, that project. And then you're saying this is all open space, but you're gonna have a road to come back and hook on the Pearson Drive?
No, 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 it's either one or the
no,
other.
there's
It's not both.
there's no road there.
Right. So basically, the question I'm asking is, what is the project? Is the project gonna be up to here, or is the project gonna be all the way back here with an access road to Pearson Drive?
One or the other.
Can I
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead and answer? So, what they've requested is an open space residential special permit, which is basically, you know, for lack of a better word, it's a cluster development. And as Rachel said, it's a two-step process. What they need to do for the OSRD is to show a plan which could be developed under our conventional subdivision rules and regulations, which is the one you see with the through road going through to Pearson Drive. And that determines the number of units that they could actually get
Number
out
of
of the
lots.
project.
So
Number of
basically
lots.
what we're saying is you're taking 14 lots and you're gonna add another 10, 15 lots to
No,
it?
no.
So it's just gonna be a
So,
total of 14
so what
lots?
they're showing on the yield plan right now is that they feel that they could get 14 lots using conventional subdivision. So,
And that's
taking
this
that
plan.
number, and that's that plan with the through road. But those 14 lots would then be utilized for the cluster development on a cul-de-sac, which would end, you know,
About halfway down.
about halfway down. The remainder, there's a significant requirement for open space. The upland, 50% of the remaining upland has to be, or open space has to be, or upland has to be open space.
Why are we always giving consideration from 500 to 950 feet for a cul-de-sac? I mean, we just fought that last year on the other side. I mean, I'm just saying to myself, I mean,
But that's why our subdivision goes down to here, because then we wouldn't need a waiver.
I understand that. But I mean, that's what, I mean, we just seem to be, you know, throwing sand against the tide here all the time. And if it comes, and then, if you do that, then you're gonna have this, okay, with a street right next to my house. On this side. And then, on the other side, to O'Neill's house. I don't see where it benefits, and I don't wanna say I'm greedy or anything, it benefits Fran Mills or Dave O'Neill.
Well, if I can take a stab at it, I think what you have to understand, the yield plan is what they say they can do without waivers, that they can do as a matter of right under subdivision.
Well, I understand that.
Okay, so we're struggling with whether or not we can, you know, we're comfortable with that 14 lots in that yield plan because of the soils and other things out there, okay? Once you establish the number of lots you can get out of the yield plan, that dictates what you can do under the open space residential development special permit, okay? And the idea of the OSRD, as I understand it, one is to encourage the use of open space, and two, it helps the developer because they have less infrastructure to build. So their lots in the OSRD are gonna be much smaller than any lots in the subdivision.
So, but from what this is showing, is you're saying, on this part here, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm somewhat of an Irishman here.
Nothing wrong with that.
I know. You've got certain size lots, correct?
Yeah.
Okay?
Mhm.
So now you got certain kind of lots that goes up to the lad's house, behind the lad's house, okay, which is, you know, probably about 400 yards from my house. So now, on this plan, if you put the street in, are these lots expanding in size itself?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, but if we approve the OSRD, that goes away.
What, the road or?
Yeah, that plan goes away, nothing comes out by your house
Okay.
if we approve the open space
Okay.
special permit.
And has all this been perked?
No.
Nothing's been perked? As
Right,
we understand behind there, because I've walked down there 100,000 times.
correct me if I'm wrong, I believe those lots we in hand wasn't been perked, but out of the lots on the,
There's
would be the western side.
There's some perk testing down kind of the center of the property.
Because I just know that down this area, which is in the back of this gentleman's area here, I mean, you get about 3 or 4 feet of water, standing water. After any sizable 2 inches of rain, 3 inches of rain, you get 3 or 4 feet of water right there. And, you know, in hooking on his wagon is saying, you know, you're talking about septic systems, and then all of a sudden they're overtaxed. So, it's just something to take a look at, something to consider, because, you know, I mean, with a road coming out you know, right next to my house. I'm sitting there saying, okay, I got, all my kids are grown, they're all done, but I got my grandsons that play in this area here. Now I got a road. All right?
Well, that's only, once again, that's only if we turn down the open space
Right.
residential special permit.
And this is the open space
And
area
not
here.
necessarily then.
And not necessarily then, because we have,
I
we
think
have a
it's-
real question as to
It's
whether.
not an either or.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because you want.
Everything has to go through a process.
Right, because if you walk back there, I mean, that's all water back there. You got all the streams and everything behind Pearson's lot, goes feeding into the Indian River and Kersey Brook and all that.
no, we're very much concerned with these
Yeah.
issues.
All right, that's just my ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I speak again?
Please.
Channing Howard, 61 Central Street. It would be evident that on the yield plan, you would also need waivers, because you would have still have a road coming through from Orchard Street.
Yes.
So your yield plan would still need looks like three waivers with the yield plan. Okay, that's question one. Perk tests that have been done in the proposed treatment area fields, were those witnessed approved by the town?
I've talked with Deb, and they were witnessed. Some of them, there are differing results. There are 3 areas that they looked at, A, B, and C, and differing results for each of those. But that's also in the packet if you wanted to see it.
So that's disturbed earth. When we built the fire station at Byfield, we couldn't put a septic system in because that's been disturbed earth. We had to put it off-site. I was wondering if there's any comments on the files about that.
That it's disturbed.
You can't perk something that's already been dug up. We've been that way. That's why the fire station took 10 years to be built in Byfield.
Well, in terms of the soils and the septic systems, I mean, that's Title V, and it really is beyond what this board can weigh in on.
Right.
We're concerned about the soils,
Right.
but we don't approve septic systems.
Right, I understand.
You know, so
I understand.
we understand your concern, it's also our concern, and we will, you know, we're gonna have that discussion in terms of yield plans, so.
Okay, last question. 50% reserved land to what is the back lot. Is that locked up forever? Nothing
Yes.
can ever be done there?
Yes.
Yeah, there would be a conservation restriction on
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
Anyone else have any concerns? Come on down.
We're at 173 Orchard Street. We just got the house. My name is Valerie Clark, and my concern is if that right-of-way that comes out of Orchard Street, our little house is right there, we have lights all the time at our house, all the time. And we just got this house. Had we known, we might have made a different choice, but we really love the house, and we own it now, and now we have to deal with this. It's not really what we were
Anticipating.
looking to, you know, deal with, you know. It's just a lot constantly coming at our house. That's what we envision, headlights all the time. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can't move our house. So that is one of the options though for a driveway, I mean, or entrance or right of way to come out of, at our house, yeah.
Yes.
The traffic is bad there as is, with that corner, and yet, I mean, it just seems like a lot for just a little town to deal with, you know? I mean, that's how I feel. I mean, I know I mentioned the wildlife too before, but that concerns me too, that everything's gonna be driven out of there, you know? But those are my concerns. I probably have more, but that's my kind of the most of the ones I can think of right now, so. Thank you.
Have we got all the shy ones now? Everybody ready? Okay. Okay, and then I guess we would continue. We do have to discuss a couple of things about continuing. I am going to be out of state next month. So I can probably participate remotely if we want to keep things going. The stipulation to that is that we would need all your information 7 days before, so everybody could be, all the information could be distributed and
Okay.
we could, you know, all be informed and ready to go. If that works for you, then we can schedule something for next month.
Okay.
And what date would that be? February 6th, I think.
February 6th is the, yeah, it's the first.
Do we have anything else lined up there?
More information given by that.
Well, that would be a question.
Right, we definitely,
So that would mean that on January 29th-ish, we have to have everything to you.
That's correct.
yeah.
I would like to say, I will say yes, but I'll have to check in the morning to make sure that that's the timeline we're on.
Now, we have to set a time and date certain now. So if you have any hesitation, maybe it would be better to look at
And then it would be 2 weeks after that?
So the next one would be the 20th, February 20th.
I would feel more comfortable on that date to make sure that I'm not doing in 2 weeks what I did tonight. I'm testing everybody's patience even more.
Yes, please.
I would move that we continue the public hearing for the open space residential development special permit application, 170 Orchard Street, map R20, lot 43A, to the 20th of February at 7:10.
Second?
All in favor?
Oh, we need roll call.
We need roll votes. All right, George?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Blair?
Yes.
Okay.
Also. All right. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Lester.
Thank you.
So next, we have Mr. Cameron.
Good. Hi, George.
Hey there.
Well, we came back to the board as suggested to give you time to review the presentation we had made. And also, I believe Martha has information that's come from the Board of Health agent and the DEP.
Right, which I passed on to the board.
You did.
So,
Make sure that,
what's the email from the
oh, in terms of, okay.
I sent it out several weeks ago, and I sent it out again today, this afternoon.
Okay. So your bottom line is you're looking for a waiver?
Well, having worked with OSID for over 30 years, the regulations you have are actually older set of regulations that were established long before DEP established the fact of central systems being allowed for single-family homes and in condominiums. They took approximately 10 years and a major environmental impact report before they came up with the regulations that allow and also the regulations that you have to meet to require them, which are immense, obviously. Involves basically establishing a condominium basis. The developer has to fund a large amount of money for maintenance and repair of the system, and then there's a monthly or yearly fee from each lot owner, depending on how the structure is set up. That was the fundamental process. They also had to have, if people didn't pay, the condominium association had the right to file liens and things of that nature to make up the difference. So that has been in the regulations now for a few years. The key is, obviously, we've got a 30 to 35 acre piece of property. Out front is a farmhouse, colonial farmhouse with open fields and a barn. And the back half of the property that abuts the Governor's Academy is a very pristine, tree-wooded, pine-wooded area. So when we decided to look at the viability of developing a marketing plan for the Woodbury estate to show, we did some soil tests on site. We had a budget to spend 2 days, and we said if the first half day you run into issues on individual lots, then try to test for a central system. And that is exactly what we did. We found 2 very good areas for central systems. All have been viewed by the Board of Health. However, obviously, there is a conflict with your zoning regulations for OSPD and also your subdivision regulations. So we're just trying to market. I'm been hired to just help the trust market the property. They're not in the business of developing property.
Interesting.
So I don't know whether or not, obviously based on what you're hearing on the other thing that's before you now, whether or not we consider, I mean, this is absolutely a gorgeous piece of property. It's on the Raleigh town line. There's town water available. We want to restore the colonial house, and we take benefit of that from the OSPD. I think anybody knows my firm. We've been proponents of OSPD for a long time. In fact, I think if Martha remembers the article that came out from the state pushing these OSRD, the selected subdivision that was selected as the right way to do it was one we did in Raleigh. So we describe ourselves more as land planners and mechanical tending engineers with numbers and lines. But the only other way to approach this would be to work with the board to change their regulations if they so would desire.
All right. Well, I guess the first thing that kind of pops up is, given the wetlands and the state of the soils, the number of lots. Okay, so that's really, unfortunately, we don't have another way to go at this.
I understand.
So with the bylaw we have at the current time, that's what we have. So the couple of things. One would be that, you know, the bylaw also says that the open space is supposed to be contiguous. Now, is the open space on this side, one could argue, is not contiguous with any open space on this
I
side?
believe we have a wood road that goes through it. There's a wood road that goes through and connects. That's not wetlands.
Here?
Can I see it?
Sure.
But there is a culvert that goes under.
Yeah, it's still, yeah, there may be a road, but it doesn't mean it's not wetlands.
No, it's right over here. See where you can see the gap right there.
Right, but still, it's still in a wetland area, regardless of whether you have a road there or not. I mean,
No, the flagged wetlands
are on either side
Are on
because you
either
have a culvert that goes under the road.
Correct, but the roadway is not in that one.
Okay.
It's in the resource area, but it's not in the public.
Okay, all right, at least it's in the resource area, we can agree with that, okay. Take it.
That's the question, then, if the culvert was removed, what would happen to that road?
It would dam up the water on one side, and it would flow over,
And
build
then
up,
And
the
the
flow
road,
over.
and the road would be eroded,
No, it would actually be a dam.
be a dam.
Right.
How long do you think that would last?
Probably about 5 to 6 years, depending on the storms,
That's
obviously.
right,
How many lots do you think you would get here if you had to perk them all? If you had to have a real perk on each lot, how many lots would we have here?
Probably 10 to 12.
Then maybe that's the number we need to start with. And then,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If I understood your comments last time you were here, even if you go the conventional subdivision route, you're still gonna need to use a shared system for some of those
That's
homes,
correct.
is that correct?
That would be our recommendation.
So either way, there would have to be a waiver of the regulation.
That's correct. That's why I said we needed a waiver both on the subdivision and the zoning.
Is it your understanding that the shared systems are only allowed if it's condominium ownership?
That's the type of, the system to maintain and repair the system must be a condominium. It doesn't matter whether you have single-family lots or not, they're all.
As long as it's common area.
It's common area, that's why we didn't show them as lots, but it's also maintained by the association.
So similar to what's done at Caldwell
Exactly.
and Colby.
Whether it's single-family lots or,
And that, once again, getting back to your yield plan, your subdivision plan, that you can do, leaving aside the waiver on the septic, that you can do under subdivision.
correct.
As long as what they have dedicated areas, sufficient areas for
And
each.
you meet all the criteria of Title V for a common system.
I have a question though. I thought that the Title V said that the shared system can only be for new construction and cluster, it would be a cluster, but if you were to do it under conventional subdivision, that the shared system, those regs don't apply to a shared system for conventional. Am I misreading
No,
that?
yeah, they do. You have to take one more step and give them the plan of how the condominium
I see.
association and what the condominium association is responsible for. So instance, if you're building, you're building a public road, in fact. It's not public, obviously, until it's accepted. So if it is accepted and you've got a sewer in the roadway, the town does not maintain that sewer. The condominium association does. So the way we address it, we actually put the sewer collection system outside of the pavement area and on an easement on the lots, as obviously to keep it out of the public way, because we don't want to rip the public roadway out to repair it. We don't have that right. In our case, we would probably say to the developer, make it a private road,
For that reason.
for that reason.
so we're thinking there are two different waivers, so to speak, that would be required. One would be for the shared system and one would be for the, I guess, the yield or the,
Well, either way, again, if I understand the comments,
Mhm.
because of the nature of the land out there, whether they go OSDR, did I get the right OSDR? Yeah,
OSRD.
special permit. Or they go conventional subdivision. Either way, they're gonna have to have some shared systems out there.
Right. But I guess so are we saying that they require special permission for that shared system?
I think they require a waiver of our regulations, because our regulations
Say
call for
each individual
house to have an individual
one.
system.
Okay, so
That's
in that
right.
respect, okay, I just wanted to
At
make
least
sure.
that's my understanding.
Right, that, no, we agree, I just wanted to make sure I was following your comments. So, Thoughts? And this is a tough nut we're gonna have to be dealing with, so.
Our timing is perfect. We understand.
So, Martha, comments on kind of like, how do we get around or through the yield obstacle?
Well,
So
that's
what-
That's the discussion.
Right, which is why I came back to saying, you know, I mean, you know what the soils are out there. You know, how many lots would you get conventionally? And I think from there, you know, there's a starting point. And then, you know, whatever bonuses you may, you know, qualify for on top of that. You know, a couple, I think, would get 2 or 3 historic and what, well, depending on how much. And again, it comes down to the calculation too. I think a lot, we don't know where your drainage is gonna go or how that's gonna be. You can't have retention ponds, you can't count your wetlands, you can't. So, I mean, it's a little bit of making sure the calcs are real.
Correct.
You know, in terms of upland open space. But I think that's kind of, I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I think at least that's a starting point for conversation.
So from a development standpoint, what is the threshold that you're going to need to make this succeed?
That's what I've got to discuss with him and his market.
Greater than 10.
Greater than 10?
When Alan Berry was involved, it was closer to 20, but Alan he's more top end, so I think he would need 20 units to make a profit.
One of the things we're trying to avoid, Randall Orent was my mentor growing up. He is probably the godfather of OSRD. He lives in, I think he's still alive, but he lives in Rhode Island. Renowned land plan. His concept was, if you take that property and take a close look at it, you have an old colonial farmhouse sitting in the middle of a field with a barn behind it, very typical New England. You don't develop that property. You put the housing back in the woods where you can selectively cut and not see it from the street. The protected open space would be the bulk of the field. That was his philosophy, and that's what we did in Raleigh. And it came up very, very nicely.
Can I just ask a question on that?
You go right ahead.
That's, was his position, it sounds to me like he's prioritizing certain kinds of open space, he's prioritizing scenic, human experience, aesthetic experiences over other kinds of.
He did a value analysis from those criteria.
Mm.
It was interesting to watch him work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So obviously the farther we have to go in, the more expensive there is involved, so. I think if we're into the 10 to 12 range, it's gonna be obviously a much shorter road system. And we would like to try to get it in and across into part of that wooded area. So it would really open, it would, against the lots that come in from Elm Street to the Government Dunham piece, would be more open space, if we're looking at 10 to 12.
The farther you go back, the longer your cul-de-sac and the greater
Correct.
waiver you put.
Exactly.
And that's what we've got to work out with the board during the whole system, is what are the trade-offs to make the aesthetics of the system really work.
So how far back would that road need to be to get to the areas that you think would actually?
Well, I think what we do is, we wouldn't do it with lots. We do a straight condominium with no lot lines. So I'd say you probably gotta get at least a few hundred feet past the crossing. So it would be greater than the 500 feet, there's no question about
Past the crossing.
that. On the left side.
So
Okay,
past-
so where the
past
road,
here.
where the road is, okay. So past this, 500 or 600 feet past this.
Not at this time, no. Well, if one make an offer, it's available, but it's not being actively marketed.
You have someone interested?
We had someone, but they no longer have interest.
And it's, so the intent is to change the use of it as you market it, or?
As the trustee, my job is just to sell the property and to its highest and best value. And if the highest and best value means to change the use of the property, then I guess that's what we would do. But I personally am not interested in doing it because I live right here. So, but you know, my duty is to try to get the value associated for this property and try to get it to market. And the thing is that if I don't explore all these avenues, I can't determine what the value is.
Are you an appraiser? Is this land use planning to assist in an appraisal of the highest and best use of the property?
No, he's hired an appraiser, we've come up with a concept.
And the appraisal would, I think, take all that information.
All the information.
Right.
Okay.
Is it 61A?
Thank
It
you.
is right now, yes.
Well, considering my newness on the board, I am hesitant to say much because I know I don't understand a
We're
little
all
bit of
trying to
everything.
explore the situation.
However, considering the two parcels we're considering, I do have a lot of concerns about the yield plan. I absolutely agree with your comment, Rachel, that
Right.
I don't see any reason to not.
And while I do,
Follow the
and
regulations.
my thinking is, and you can correct me actually if I'm wrong, but, the whole OSRD was to, have an incentive for the developer to have less infrastructure and to protect what would be developable open space. Of course, now we find ourselves into a position that maybe it's not so developable, and so why should we grant extra lots on insufficient soils? It's kind of and at the same time, we want housing. So, it's, we're trying to grapple with it at the same time. But I think, right now, my first impression is 23 lots is high. I think you know that.
Mhm.
So, if we can get down to some other, a lower number that gives us more open space, I think you're still gonna end up with a considerable road regardless. I don't know what the rest of the town fathers think of, us continually allowing, longer roads.
I think the tongue lashing occurred again tonight.
Yes, I believe it did.
But I mean, I think we've shown on the concept plans that we can loop this road around. They have two
Right.
entrances.
Right, but
All I'm
that's-
saying is for a development of this amount.
Right.
um,
And that impacts more wetlands, so it's like, again, where is our, we're supposed to be protecting, resource areas, so we really don't want the loop road to go through the wetlands twice, especially when it's already, you already have a road that's already impacted the wetlands, so let's not do it again. So there's a lot to toss around here.
I'm gonna push the envelope in the other direction.
Okay, okay.
Because we are trying to provide an environment where we can get more housing. We want to see something constructive done with your potential development in a manner that's fitting to the environment of the community. And so, where's our flexibility if we go with a shared system in calculating our yield? I think is where the discussion then is directed. And along the same lines, what type of housing do you foresee being developed here? The town would truly benefit from housing that is, affordable, but you have to be able to pay for what you're doing. And with a smaller amount of lots, that's going to be a finer line, so your price point's going to be very different than if you had a a larger scale development with homes that have a different price point. So, you know, it's one of these scenarios where, you know, how do we make it work with what our regulations are, with what our flexibility might be, and what's going to be economically possible? Because you're right, the berry development is a whole different,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and it's beautiful, and it's, you know, is that what the town needs to try to meet our housing needs? And I don't wanna push it to the, you know, to another extreme, I wanna find out, you know, and so the questions we ask, that's why we,
Very good questions.
well, I don't think they're very good, but they're questions.
No, the only stupid question is the one that's not asked.
Well, I share the concerns that have been expressed about this particular project. And I want to be very careful what I say, because what I'm about to say doesn't in any way, shouldn't be construed as an approval of what you're, you know, what you're presenting
We're
here.
getting approval until there was something before.
Right, I mean, all of this would have to be fleshed out in the process, but as I understand it, you initially came before us with a very narrow question. Would we consider in an appropriate case waiver of the single, or waiver of the regulations to permit a shared system? Speaking only for myself, all else being equal, without endorsing anything here, if Title V permits it, Board of Health approves it, I don't know why we ought not to at least consider it. I don't know if that answers your question from my point of view, but.
Because as I see it, it was exactly what you were presenting was the fact that you control the density through a special permit. And to allow us to look at that, we can then look at what does 10 to 12 units cost with the improvements we know we're going to have to put in with a shared system, and see if we can come up with something to present.
I would concur with Larry, that, you know, we would consider a reasonable.
Yeah, I mean,
Proposal.
there seems to be, and I'm not an expert on Title V, but there seems to be some discussion as to whether or not it's permitted under Title V. You seem very confident, Woody, in your interpretation. And ultimately, the town council would probably have to issue an opinion, you know, when we get to that stage. But, did we help with
Got the
it?
message?
More?
Yeah, I get that.
I know, did we help her?
Yeah, we have to do some more thinking.
One number crunching.
Find out, is that marketable?
Right. But this may be all I need, really, to be honest with you. I gotta go back and report to the other folks that make the decisions, but, you know, I mean, that's, appreciate everyone's time on this, and it's just, it's a lot to, with absolutely no background in any of this, it's kind of, you know, it's a little difficult, but, it's helpful.
And if you're looking at bonuses and thing, density bonuses, and would you be open to considering a preservation restriction on the existing farmhouse? You know, things that could increase your density.
Yeah, we had mentioned that in the report.
Okay.
We thought that was important.
So I know you talked about preserving it, but I didn't know if you were actually willing to do a restriction on it,
And
which
I
would be.
think the bond's in very good shape, you know?
Pretty good, Jake.
Yes, we're looking at the bond as well.
Mhm.
Okay, why don't we go back and we'll talk to the appraisal people and marketing people and see what we can go forward with, and we'll just keep you informed. If in fact, Mark does, in the state does not want to permit this, so they obviously what they're gonna do is find a buyer who wants to chime in on the process.
Right.
But
Well, one
we
thing I,
would certainly say that whoever comes up and does the design should work very closely with the planning staff, planning, not bring in plans right away for
Right.
permit, but really just get your input. Because there's two things you can look at. You can look at developing toward the field, which goes counter to what my thinking is, but it also shortens the road.
I think it also depends on, you know, looking at what has certain things like the greatest habitat value,
Right,
so.
exactly.
And the most developable land, the best soil is for development.
Well, one
I
thing
don't
though-
know that it is or isn't, I'm
Right,
just saying
right,
that's
yeah. Right.
where you would look, I guess.
Of course, yeah. But I will thank you for putting this together in such a great format,
You're welcome.
you know, because it did kind of just boom, you know, brought you right to where you need to be considering.
Very good. We'll look at that and go over that.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good night, Woody.
Good night, George. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have I'll connect to my, thank you for having me.
You have anything on the
I've
got
Yeah, and I'll know it tomorrow morning.
Larry, after our
Why don't I,
meeting, Larry put together a revision.
Okay.
And we've had a little bit of discussion after that, subsequent to that on the marijuana bylaw.
Martha,
Yes,
I just hung around to ask a question. Can I ask it?
Sure.
Okay. As you remember, I attended the workshop meetings for the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission for the housing.
the housing, yes,
And I saw that you're having some workshops changing the zoning.
yes.
Are those, are you changing zonings to help with the housing needs, or is, I tried to attend some of your workshops, but it just didn't work out. And as you know, I'm concerned about the housing needs for the area.
Right. We're looking at the potential of changing our open space residential housing bylaw, although probably not for Springtown meeting, and I'm not we haven't really kind of focused in on some of the housing recommendations that came out of the housing plan yet.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right, so you're still working on that then?
yeah, so I think that will be for a later time. We're trying to hit a couple of things that have come up that seem to be kind of priority items that we need to deal with.
Okay, so, you know, I'd like to be part of the solution, but I really don't know what it is myself. I think by changing the accessory apartment, you know, adding that was helpful to a certain segment of people, but there's a lot more that really needs to be done.
Right, I mean, part of it is looking at you know, potentially zoning some areas for multifamily.
The problem with that is, oh, I see, you're not talking about housing for the elderly, or you're talking about just multifamily.
Yeah, multifamily, which could be for the elderly or, you know, other, just providing more housing options in town
Right.
in general, not necessarily specifically targeted to elderly.
Okay, all right, well, maybe we can chat sometime and I can add my thoughts. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You. Okay.
Who was that? She didn't state her name.
Oh,
Just
it's,
curious.
she's Evelyn Noyes. She manages the two elderly housing, Oak Ridge and Quaker Hill in Byfield. She's also a local realtor in Byfield.
Thanks. Are the housing recommendations she referred to in the housing production plan? Or are those written recommendations that came out of that process?
It came out of the process, and she did attend a couple of our workshops, and a lot of what was discussed. They're two, in housing for the elderly and then housing for, say, millennials or younger people. There's really a lack of that at kind of both ends of the spectrum.
Mhm.
There aren't homes that people can downsize into. There aren't homes that younger families can afford to buy.
Mhm.
And there aren't any other, we really have almost no options other than the elderly housing complexes that we have. And she was looking at ways of possibly splitting up some of the larger houses or creating more condominiums or things along those lines.
Okay. Well, if there's any, I feel as though this question of housing is one I'm playing catch up on a little, but is clearly at a high awareness in the discussions we're having. So if there's anything I should read or to get a little more of an understanding of the history or the town's whatever.
Have you seen the housing plan?
Well, I hadn't until it came in an email about an hour, a couple
Yeah,
hours
okay,
ago.
yeah, all right.
And I clicked on it and I went to the map. And I was
There you go.
frankly kind of amazed at that map with the circles on it. So I would like to spend more time understanding how those lots were determined and what the background
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And so I'll do my homework, but anything you want to send my way.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of fill you in on that. And there's also the housing element from our master plan update, and that was fairly well complete by our consultant, so those would be the two things to
Can I
take a
just
look at.
maybe, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but just that map that I did click on, it's page 53 or something, I don't know. I was really doing it very fast on my phone, so. While the pasta was cooking. But is there a discussion in the plan of how that map was created with the lots that were identified as potential housing, the criteria for those circles?
To be honest, I'm not sure how much discussion in depth.
Because that table actually had lot numbers, like this site 3, 23 lots in that table, right?
I'll have to take a look at it again. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, it was, yeah, I think it was kind of an estimate of number of units that it might have, and for this site.
Just based on
Yes.
acreage, or did it look at site considerations?
It was based on acreage, and quite honestly, we had the discussion, a kind of a preliminary discussion on this parcel with that number of units, but that isn't to say that that's how many it would, actually support. And same with Orchard Street, because that's on there as well. I think we might have identified 14 for it, because again, there had been preliminary discussions that hadn't gone all the way through the process. So,
It was interesting to me, and again, as a gut reaction to it, to have a published document that identified parcels as desirable for development with lots approximated that exists for any developer, any landowner, anyone in the region to look at and say, oh, maybe that's a good one to go to them. They already want to do it there. So maybe some of the hurdles I would see in my review of development, they might be inclined to look more positively on the waivers and blah, blah, et cetera.
yeah.
It just was interesting to me. So that's, I want to spend a little more time understanding
Good question.
that. It may be a great guide for us, I think, going forward, to think about that if there's already been an assessment and some determination, but it depends on
Also,
the criteria.
Some of it in this town is like what is developable and what is not, since we don't have any infrastructure, so it's gets tough, and so all the.
Which
You know,
would
the
make me
physical
very
constraints
hesitant
of-
to circle lots as
You
development.
know, so, well, you don't know, I mean, it's just a general,
Right, I mean,
you're not certifying it, you know,
No.
bona fide, developable, so.
Right.
And some of it was just, it was areas and it was, you know, in the abstract without, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about our poor soils for septic systems and things like that. So there were, you know, some sort of assumptions that had to be made that those could be potentially addressed or would have to be addressed in order to get any kind of development there.
Yeah, well, this shared system thing is gonna be interesting, because it would make more of the land developable.
Absolutely.
Usable.
Yeah,
Usable.
so, that's assuming they work, you
Right.
know, which is up to the state to certify that they do.
And maintenance, long-term maintenance, I think is a real concern relative to
Well, it was,
some
with the- it was with the state, and
complex
that's what Mr. Cameron was basically
Yeah.
pointing out, was all the legal
It's a requirement.
requirements to.
Well, on that point, why wouldn't Orchard Street also require that same waiver?
What do you mean?
For joint system, joint septic system?
That would be, I think
They
they
would.
probably do.
It would.
Yeah,
Yeah, they just don't know they need it yet.
okay.
Public hearing is,
I mean, they're gonna have to, but I don't think they had everything lined up that they're gonna need to ask. But it's the same, you know, it's the same issue. All right, meanwhile, back at marijuana.
Thanks.
Larry, do you want
Sure. Just a couple of things. After our last meeting, I put together this new draft, and Martha had what I think is an excellent idea, which I haven't been able to address yet. Part B prohibits marijuana establishments within 500 feet of pre-existing public blah, blah, blah. Unless the property, the protected use in the marijuana establishment is separated by state highway, railroad right-of-way, perennial stream, or significant wetlands. The suggestion was to perhaps move that down to D, and rather than make it, in B, it's as of right, pretty much. And if we move it down to D, make it discretionary with the board,
I see, yeah.
which I think makes some sense. The other thing I think could be improved, I was just trying to get something out. The last sentence about, and further, the table of use regulations is amended. I think we probably, it's been the custom, I think, to actually insert in the warrant article an excerpt from the table of use regulations itself, because there might be footnotes, et cetera, that we want to include. Martha, when we refer these things to the selectmen, do we refer them a proposed warrant article or simply a description of the action we think that ought to be taken?
usually it's a description, as detailed as we can, description of the action that we.
So we don't
take.
necessarily have to have it.
Right.
In, you know, in final form. And the other thing, Martha and I were talking, and I am, excuse me, I am still a bit troubled about just completely taking out the buffers for residential. And I acknowledge the soundness of your arguments, Peter, I really do. And if we were starting from scratch, I would have less concern about it. But I just wonder what it's going to look like, what sort of response we're going to get at town meeting if we remove the buffers. So that said, I wasn't able to do a lot of research, but I tried to find some similarly situated towns and see what they had for buffer zones. The only one I've come up with so far is Raleigh, and they had 200 feet period, don't even mention residential. So, and I'm not sure if that's property line to property line or building to building. So at least Raleigh took a much more lenient view, but I was just wanted to express my concern, you know.
Yeah. And I share that concern for the same reasons, actually. One thing I was hoping to do, although if we're moving, well, I brought the zoning map in case we needed to refer to it, but if we're moving retail into commercial highway, and actually we have an issue with other uses. It's completely surrounded by residential. So having any residential buffer there might be difficult, but I share Larry's concerns for the same reasons.
You know, with recognizing that we do have the,
Well, could the buffer, instead of what we're thinking of as a buffer, be just like a setback, a building setback? That can't be any closer than,
I think we can do it, yeah.
you know, instead of thinking of, because as soon as we get into buffers, we get into trouble, it seems, in terms of trying to make them work, but I don't know how small the parcels are up there. So what would be a, reasonable 50 feet from the property line? You couldn't have a building, a retail establishment any closer than 50 feet to a, not the property, but the building.
Residential building, yeah.
Something like that.
Well, I could take a look at and see what might be reasonable.
I think Newburyport's playing with 100 feet, and I think that's why they just rezoned some property up on Story Ave, some residential property.
100 feet building to building, or?
I don't know how it was meant. Again, people throw out the word buffer, and you don't know what it means. So, and 100 feet, depending on the area, seems like that could be quite constricting. But I think we might be able to come up with some sort of compromise if we think of it as a setback instead of a buffer.
When do we have to get this? We have to vote on this in the first February meeting?
I'm gonna take another look at the schedule. Tracy did confirm that town meeting is gonna be April 23rd. So I'll take another look at that, but I think we're pretty tight. And again, it doesn't need to be the exact language, but if we have, fair idea.
Does it go to council first or to selectmen first?
I would want to review it with council before it went to selectmen.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
And kind of as a two-stage one, conceptually what we're thinking of doing, just review it with her to make sure that there are, no fatal flaws or issues. And then certainly the final warrant language and the bylaw language itself will all be reviewed by council.
So, aside from this one issue that seems to be still up in the air, are we close on any of the other ones to move forward with it?
Well, I think the wireless, I think based on what we talked about last time, is pretty good to go. The OSRD, I think we should.
We're gonna have to punt that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to punt that. And actually, it was interesting when I was looking at the special permit requirements in Mass General Law that specifically says that town can require a special permit for a clustered development. So there seems, after looking at that, there seems to be some conflict between that language and the Wall Street development case and the subdivision language. So I want to talk to Lisa a little bit more about that, because I'm
Well, I think you can have an option, it's just that you can't require them to go through the process. I think that was the difference. Like, I think Larry said, make it permissive and it would solve our problem. But it doesn't really solve all of our problems, because it doesn't solve the yield problem.
Right.
But in terms of case law. All right, just wondered. So, but I hear you on that.
I just, the anti-pot people are gonna stand up at town meeting and cry foul. We're,
I just, how many, do we have anti-pot people?
I don't know, good question. I could be wrong, I could be, they could stand up and do the opposite.
I thought we were pretty much a pro-pot town, but I could be wrong too.
Well, there's some people are,
Right.
have strong feelings about it,
Yeah,
on
for
either
sure.
side.
Right. George, do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, which one, the marijuana?
Yeah, and the residential buffer or setback in particular?
Yeah, well, first of all, I believe everything under the statute is sideline to sideline of the
It is for kindergarten through 12. The 500-foot buffer is property line to property line in the straightest.
Right. But those buffers can be reduced. I guess it's a question of how much do you think any one particular operation is going to affect surrounding people, houses, dwellings, schools, and so on. So they had tossed out, 5,000 as most everything, but some towns have gone much less. So we can certainly do things like that, and once we sit down to consider where each location might be.
Right.
So you have to plan in advance where somebody might want to have a facility to either sell or grow or whatever's processed, whatever else can be done. That's hard to do. So I wouldn't want to be the one who had to do it.
I know, but aren't we just talking retail establishment with this?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, we're not getting into any other,
Well,
right?
I'd like to keep it pretty thin, just to, love to have it just for processing, not for processing, but for grow. I'm not sure how many we would get, for sales, I'm not sure how many we would get if anything. You have to say, what is the risk to this town of having different facilities? And we keep say the industrial, light industrial, business, light industrial down to some better, easier distance or setback rather than we would do in residential. It's just very difficult.
Well, I think the 500 feet is for any marijuana establishment. Correct me if
Yeah, but
I'm
that's
wrong.
just a starting point, isn't it?
Well, but that's specifically from the schools, and I think the recommendation was to kind of keep that language, since that's in the CCC regs. The rest of
Okay.
it is really pretty discretionary.
That's
Well,
okay.
maybe we have to identify what the schools are and go from there.
Right, which we've done for the business and light industrial, at least for the,
Right.
and,
Okay. No, I have no further comments on it.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
No, I'll take a look at my map and see what,
Maybe we can talk and see. I mean, we can always, I suppose there's nothing wrong with presenting the selectmen with alternatives either, is there?
no, although I think, if they're not comfortable kind of choosing one of those alternatives that night, that could be, if the discussion got extended, then we could get into issues with our time frame.
All right.
So, but yeah, maybe we can talk further.
Sure.
Okay.
Anything else?
Mhm.
That's it?
That's it.
Guess we have to let Larry go back to bed.
Well,
Do you have anything,
A motion to adjourn?
please?
So moved.
second?
And it's gonna be right on it.
Oh, it's gonna be. Kristen, do you want to adjourn?
Aye.
Oh, yes,
Larry?
yes.
George?
I couldn't hear you.
Motion, we're moving to adjourn?
Okay.
Yes.
Martha, who gets the paperwork on the stipend that you handed out last time? Does that go to the town accountant?
It goes to the treasurer,
The treasurer?
yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
We're adjourned.